Hello, I would like to welcome you in OntoCommons webinar on what can ontologies do for standardization. Next slide. It is a pleasure to say some words about the project, to provide you a very brief overview. My name is Nadja Adamovic. I'm a scientist at Technical University of Vienna, and I'm the coordinator of OntoCommons project. It's a pleasure to introduce you the project. First of all, this project was submitted within Horizon 2020 call under the topic towards standardized documentation of data through taxonomies and ontologies. It is a coordination and support action type of the project. The project started in November 2020, and it is a 3-year project with a budget of about 4 million euros. Next slide. We have a consortium consisting of 19 project partners from 10 European countries. 15 of them are research institutions and 4 companies. You see logos of involved institutions. Next slide. Some words about the major goal of the project. It is to overcome interoperability bottlenecks and to facilitate data standardization and valorization of data. Like I mentioned, it is a CSA type of the project. It means that we will bring together and coordinate activities of the most relevant European and international stakeholders. For us, it is really important to engage stakeholders in the program of OntoCommons, and the major outcome of the project is to develop ontology commons ecosystem as a foundation for standardized data documentation. Next slide. I just mentioned that we will deliver at the end of the project ontology common ecosystem, and just some words on what it is composed of. First of all, we have a set of ontologies that are a part of this system. These ontologies have different levels from the top level until the application level, and not every ontology will be a part of this system. Those ontologies that would fulfill specifications and requirements which are defined at the beginning of the project can be a part of the system. We have a pluralistic approach, meaning that we have several top-level ontologies that are a part of the system, and within our project, we will work on the alignment and harmonization between different ontologies. We cover different domains within OntoCommons, basically those which are a part of the NMBP working program, but mainly now we are focused on materials and manufacturing, but not only. There are also other domains covered with OntoCommons. Which domains are covered are basically defined by different application and the number of user cases that we have in the project. Beside ontologies, we have also different tools that support development and building of ontologies and also data documentation. Within the project, we do not develop these tools, but use state-of-the-art tools. There is some development on the level of ontologies, and in particular on the top level. We develop a top reference level, and also there will be partly development in the domain level in the case there is need for specific applications. Within this project, we do harmonization of data. We develop intra-domain interoperability, but also cross-domain interoperability. Next slide. Some words about the major outcomes of the project. Like I mentioned, we will develop OntoCommons ecosystem. We will develop a methodological framework for ontology development and documentation. And what is for a CSA type of the project extremely important is to build a community. Our stakeholders are composed really of scientists, domain experts, ontologists, industrial stakeholders, end users, also policymakers. And with this community, we plan or we already started discussions on different topics within a number of different events which we organize within the project, webinar like we have to date, but also sometimes we organize workshops which are focused on different topics, or we organize very global workshops as well, where we start discussion with external stakeholders, and practically we work together. The consortium is very open and works together with external people as well. The results of such discussions are strategic documents, and just to mention a couple of them, the most important is OntoCommons roadmap. And also discussions within this webinar will contribute to the input to the roadmap as well. And to mention maybe second document, it is OntoCommons standardization impact report, what is in reality also the topic of this webinar today. In the project, we have a large number of end user cases, like you can see on this slide in the list of demonstrators. This is just a short list of those which were involved since the beginning of the project. But during the project, we will have a number of additional user cases, and the purpose is really to test and to evaluate the OntoCommons ecosystem, and to show the benefits of using such ecosystem for the end users. Next slide. So I thank you with this slide for your attention. That was really very brief introduction to the project, and I will hand over to the next speaker. This is Dimitris Kiritsis. Dimitris is a faculty member at the School of Engineering of EPFL and also on the University of Oslo. And Dimitris is expert in the ontology-based engineering, sustainable manufacturing, predictive maintenance, and engineering asset management. Dimitris is also very active in OntoCommons project and will give a talk on the standardization landscape.
Thank you very much, Nadja, for your kind introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to introduce this webinar, so the subject of the webinar, to the audience, which is about standardization efforts in the context of our topic, of course, for ontologies or using ontologies. So it is so last year, particularly with the advent of data and other emerging technologies, it is recognized largely by industry and other communities that standards are very important for the performance and for the efficiency of operations in the industrial and the other domains as well. This is reflected on the need to manage efficiently the data all around the world globally, and also communicate globally in terms of data among stakeholders. And this requires for global standards to allow stakeholders to communicate and agree on the availability of data or the use of data, etc. And in OntoCommons, so we believe, and we, let's say, our efforts concentrate on the use of ontologies to map large data volumes and allow to do intelligent semantic queries using, let's say, appropriate vocabularies. And then this will make analytics of data also efficient. The OntoCommons.eu project as a CSA, as a coordinated support action. So the ambition of this project is to develop the community and allow the community to talk so to organize discussions among the stakeholders and the participants in this community to assess all the efforts. One of the aspects is to assess all the efforts in standardization for ontologies or using ontologies. Next slide, please, Rita. These three, let's say, main lines. So ontologies to be used by standardization organizations, and maybe you know, as I know, that many standardization organizations, including ISO communities, they try to somehow transform or adapt the existing standards using ontologies. And also, I know that corporations, big corporations, they try to transform standards that they are using ontologies, because in the purpose that we said before, so increase interoperability and make more efficient use of data. And ontologies also can be used as links between standards, again, to link semantically various families of standards. And also ontology standards will become part of the industrial ecosystem, which is the objective of communities like the Industrial Ontologies Foundry or the OntoCommons or the ENMC also. And this will be discussed and addressed by other speakers in these workshops, in this webinar. Next slide, please. Thank you. So every standard is a result of a compromise, it's a result of a consensus. If you are involved in standards, you know this game very well. It takes time. But at the end, if we have a consensus, we have a published standard. And in terms also in the context of ontologies, this consensus is heavily on the semantics of terms, because ontologies is about semantics, is to express semantics, express meaning of the real world and all the activities that we do as humans and also systems do in the real world. And this has to be, again, these terms have to be, let's say, aligned in different standards. And also there is a need of alignment between standards that they use terms with a different meaning sometimes. So this has to be harmonized, this has to be aligned. And also there are standards that, many standards that where you see overlaps, or even in some domains, there are many standards to express the same thing. So we believe that ontologies can help, let's say, to harmonize these overlaps and integrate standards. So we at the end, we will have consistency in our operations. Next slide, please, Rita. Thank you. So now we are in the era of Industry 4.0, and which is driven by data, but digital data. Also, there are other types of data, connectivity, Internet of Things, etc., and cyber systems, where you have artificial intelligence solutions linked to physical systems, linking physical systems and digital software systems, etc. And this, we see already that this represents a huge opportunity for business. It is already applicable. And also Industry 5.0, the need for this kind of consistency and interoperability and standards will be even increased. And these systems have to be accurate. Their interactions have to be secured and trusted. And so we need a coherent approach for this, for the communications at the semantic level between multiple intelligence systems, not only between two, but we will have multiple systems that they will need to communicate together in a harmonized and in an efficient way with a minimum of mistakes or not mistakes at all. And then in the domain of smart manufacturing, where we have materials that have to be represented, and processes have to be represented in order to transform materials in a smart way. And this requires knowledge. Knowledge can be expressed, as we know, in ontologies. And this has to happen also in a way that allows interoperability between systems and between systems and humans. Next slide, please. So we don't start all this work from scratch. So we will build on what we have in the global setting. So our mission and our method is to contribute to working groups where we have first to support or existing or create taxonomies, which is one of the elements, major element of ontologies, taxonomies and the vocabularies, and standard development organizations that do exist, like the Industrial Ontology Foundry, where there are many common elements with this, various ISO committees, IEEE committees, the ETSI, and others that the Digital Twin Consortium. There is a lot of activity there using ontology, and also other organizations like W3C, which develops standards for ontology, so or about ontologies, like the OWL and others. So other communities, they use standards to represent their activity. W3C, they use standards for about the ontologies. And also we have an action in progress to create a dedicated industry commons group, because OntoCommons is runs in the framework of industry commons in general, and also with the GRC European Commission to collaborate, to liaise with the standard development organizations in order to test the interoperability standards. Next, please. So yes, we have also to map international standardization initiatives. As I said before, there are many, and sometimes many for the same, in the same scope, in the same context. And our project OntoCommons focus on data documentations, technical data documentation used based on ontologies and taxonomies in domains that are related to materials or nanomaterials production and bio domains. This is the R&D unit of the European Commission. And also we monitor, so we have partners, so Trust IT, running the other project, standardization.eu, because OntoCommons is also mainly so heavily involved in ICT implementations. So we collaborate with this project, and results will be fed to the also to the multi-stakeholder platform on ICT standardization. Next, please. I think this was the last one. Thank you, Rita, for helping me in that. And thank you very much for your attention. And the next speakers will further elaborate on all these elements. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. We are coming to the next talk that will be given by Silvana Muscella, who is CEO at Trust IT company. Silvana is involved in the OntoCommons, in particular on the task related to standardization of ontologies. And please, Silvana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, everybody, and good afternoon. And this is a nice follow-up to the slide deck that Dimitris has just presented. As I think what we wanted to show with this very short presentation was how different CSAs within the European Commission under Horizon 2020 effectively work together. And this is a wonderful example that we managed to give between OntoCommons and StandICT. There are different projects that are funded on standardization. Some of you might be familiar with them. There's Indico, that's led by ETSI, and there's Bridget 1 and 2, that's Senelec were leading, all to try and improve the cooperation between industry standards, research standards, and working together with different standard developing organizations. So if you can see here with the slide in front of you, in the specific case of ontologies, they help tackle many of the challenges that are identified in the European standardization system that you see here bulleted. And in fact, there are specific incentives out to try and address the bottlenecks. And why is this an issue today? Because global standardization is in need of a more agile process to try and introduce standardization efforts, and that they are taken up by the market. And this is certainly an area that needs specific work on in the coming months. And some of the projects that we work on with the use cases try and pull out this type of agility to give some guidelines to those who are absolutely need to work on standardized efforts, but would be in need of some guidance to help them navigate their way through the jungle. So next slide, please. You might be all familiar with the rolling plan for ICT standardization. This is led and organized as part of the multi-stakeholder platform. There's a task force in place that work rigorously around different chapters and sections of the rolling plan that's updated yearly. And in fact, they're working on the 2022 edition. You're able to download this on offline. And what the Stan ICT project tries to do is to map the priorities that are clearly listed in the rolling plan. Ontologies, semantic interoperability playing a central role in this specific document too. And it's important to actually make sure you dip into that and see what else is going on out there, so you don't maybe reinvent the wheel, but all indicators of all the digital single market thematic areas are listed here. So moving on, the rolling plan actually has a specific analysis around 4 main topic areas, which are the key enablers and security, societal challenges, innovation for the digital single market, and sustainable growth. And all recommendations in all areas revolve around ontologies. Moving on to the next slide. Moreover, what I mentioned before was the connection with Stan ICT and our European Observatory for ICT Standardization, which is called YOS, where OntoCommons actually plays a specific role in different areas of the observatory that the other Stan ICT CSA has put together, where whatever comes out in terms of results from standards will be included into the repository of Stan ICT. There is an area to discuss, and this is part, and it's thanks to OntoCommons, in fact, that Stan ICT has decided to put together a technical working group on ontologies. And there are different representatives also from the members that Dimitris also mentioned that will be part of this technical group to deliver a landscape analysis. The content of this landscape analysis report will provide content for the standardization deliverable that Nadja mentioned at the beginning of the talk. At the same time, if we're able, through OntoCommons, to provide some insights around advances, around ontologies, then this could also influence whatever's written in the ICT rolling plan for 2022. So next slide, if to have a look at this in a bit more detail, what we want to do is the other points I've mentioned just now, but also, if you may recall, any of you who are involved in the European Open Science Cloud, there's a dedicated section in the latest SRIA around ontologies and semantic interoperability. So what we'd like to do within OntoCommons is to make sure that the demonstrators, the 11 demonstrators that we have at the moment, and any new onboarded ones, can perhaps become valid use cases for EOSC and in the impact monitoring around the task forces that are being set up. We'd like to be able to give some insights from the results from these demonstrators there. Okay, next slide. And here are some examples. What we did before the presentation was to cross-check how many applicants came into the running open calls for StandICT, and we've collected 12 applications. If you can see in the priority areas that are listed on your right, you see ontologies is there. And here are some titles and EU priority areas that we mentioned before, and the specific standard developing organization that the activity is working on. The monitoring aspect that we need to look at is to see how these applications are contributing, if they're looking at any revision of existing standards, or are these applications actually the development of new standards that would go into additional activity? And here is the list at the moment. So it's pretty, we're pretty pleased that already that 12 applications have come in, and it was thanks to the synergy made with this project that we decided to actually list ontologies as a specific priority area. Next slide. Zooming in on the demonstrators that have already been mentioned, even here, we want to have a greater focus on understanding which standards are being worked on within these 11. And what we intend to do as part of this activity is pull out the efforts there and then try and incorporate them in the technical working groups of StandICT, have them liaise with the multi-stakeholder platform too, and see if we can introduce these as part of the discussions within the AOSC task forces. And this clearly helps for interoperability and fairness principles for the OntoCommons demonstrators. Next slide. And that's the end of the overview of the standardization aspects within the ontologies demonstrators and the link with StandICT. If any of you who are on the call would like to apply for the fifth, we're now on the 5th open call for StandICT, and you'd like to capitalize on some financial support that you're working on specifically, then we'd be very happy to receive your applications around the areas linked to OntoCommons. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nadja. Back to you.
Thanks, Silvana, for this talk. We are coming to the next talk that will be given by Gerhard Goldbeck, who is founder and CEO of Goldbeck Consulting Company. Gerhard Goldbeck is Executive Secretary of EMMC Association. He's a board member of the European Materials Characterization Council and very strongly involved in OntoCommons on various topics, but in particular in collaborations with other projects and also with other standardization organization among others. So please, Gerhard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nadja, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'm just adding a little bit more flavor to all of the things that have already been mentioned, and this overview of just some kind of logos gives a bit of an impression of the rich, wide and complex landscape that OntoCommons is working in, and that we are preparing a landscape analysis of the initiatives to cooperate with, and we are always tracking collaborations and so on. We've heard obviously about all of the organizations in the top row and some are in the other areas, but just to pick out some points on this slide, we have within materials and manufacturing a landscape that obviously includes the specific organizations that are interested in and support materials and manufacturing ontology development, such as the IOF and the EMMC, and we'll hear about these in a minute. But also we have kind of Internet of Things type of collaborations and machine-to-machine interest in the IIRDS and 1M2M for it as examples, data documentation initiative. Then bottom right, we also looking at, for example, computer-aided engineering, also supporting the process industry. So standards such as CAPE Open represented there. of course, W3C, and then interesting, the E-class, the standard really for, as was mentioned by Dimitris as well, in terms of taxonomies, vocabularies, and terms that define all of the products and services that are offered, that then reach all the way from all of the categories mentioned, so you can find in there specific products, and also all the way down to materials such as specific polymers and so on. So these are very important resources that we then all bring in together and want to collaborate with to provide that common system for data documentation in the materials and manufacturing industries, that to provide industry 4.0 to 5.0 support. All of this needs to be brought together and on a standard level. So it's just some examples in the next slide, starting with the IIRDS. So starting from the kind of perspective more of the ICT, first of all, IIRDS aims to make intelligent information for smart users, being a consortium with over 30 members working towards the standardization. We collaborate, discussing the technical potential of the different ontology levels brought in here, and looking at how a standard ICT here can also be used to support the IIRDS developments. The standards are mentioned in the next block here, basically the metadata and provided with the content, and then this package format for exchange of packages with intelligent information. So in terms of the outputs and collaborations, we're looking at demonstrators in the OntoCommons framework that we can then work with together with the IIRDS colleagues and contribute to the OntoCommons standardization deliverables and the OntoCommons roadmap. In the next slide, we now go from the sort of Internet of Things specific to the more towards the manufacturing framework, where the industrial ontologies foundry has really been the leading initiative for some time, that is working to create or co-create, as it says here, open reference ontologies to support manufacturing and engineering industries. We have very in-depth collaboration, as there is strong overlap with OntoCommons participants, but also advisory board members and further collaborators, and also partners in demonstrators that are all involved in the IOF. And IOF is working also with OAGI now more towards, or has this collaboration agreement to produce sort of a standardized set of open industrial ontologies that spans the entire domain of digital manufacturing. I believe that there will be surely also more about that in the panel discussions. I just mentioned as standards in terms of important references here that where key people from IOF, such as obviously Barry Smith and others, have been contributing to, and these are the standards for top-level ontologies and basic formal ontology that are really key resources in this field. So in the next slide, then we will see the initiative that is from the materials field. The EMMC has been an initiative since 2014, more formally an association registered since 2019. It's initiated the EMO, formerly the European Materials and Modeling Ontology, now a more general framework for applied sciences called the Elementary Multi-Perspective Material Ontology. There is again a lot of collaboration and overlap as with the IOF, also in terms of people, but also in terms of the workshops and so on. I want to mention in this framework, just to contrast and show the whole landscape as well, standards that have been developed by EMMC, and also one more by the Characterization Council and related projects. So another initiative in the materials field. And these are CEN workshop agreements on terminologies, classification, and metadata. One finished a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, on materials modeling, and another one in the draft stage on materials characterization. And I also saw some questions in the chat, because they really show the sort of the bottom-up work, which is really important to develop terminologies and classifications and vocabularies and so on, which are then complement also the top-down ISO level standardization, and the two really need to work together to construct this standardization ecosystem in such a complex world. We're here also working on landscape and gap analysis, on domain ontologies, as I mentioned earlier, and on demonstrators as well. So these are just some snapshots of collaborations then in the different fields that are key to the success of OntoCommons and the communities OntoCommons would like to support. So with that, I'd like to hand over back to Nadja, and then on to, I believe, Hedi for the panel.
Yes, thanks, Gerhard. We are coming to the next talk that will be given by Hedi Karray. Hedi is a technical coordinator of OntoCommons project, and Hedi is also expert in ontology-based engineering. Please, Hedi, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadja. Hello, everyone. So it's my pleasure to introduce this panel and to moderate this panel with great speakers that we have today in this roundtable.
Hedi, I lost you. I'm not sure if this is only the case by me. I cannot hear Hedi.
No, we lost him. Probably he's having some connection issues.
Let's wait for a minute. I guess that he will
Yes.
try to reconnect.
Yes. Meanwhile, maybe we could go through some of the questions. There was one question. No, there were several questions. Maybe I can start by reading the first one. Regarding ontology, standardization and harmonization, this was a question for Dimitris, how top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches could meet?
Thank you. Yes, it is Jan Lu asked this question. Thank you, Jan,
Yes.
for this. Historically, I think the community, or let's say early adopters of ontologies, and I think still now is the case, they started building ontologies for their own purpose, for their own problem, so which is at the application level, at their specific domain level. And when doing so they are using their own vocabulary and try, of course, to take into account common sense or general knowledge, etc. But the ontology developed so on the application level is quite specific to the application level. So when other people from the same sector for similar domains develop ontologies or along a value chain, so there is a need for communication, for discussion, etc. So from this need, appeared the need to harmonize definitions of vocabularies, taxonomies, etc. They align various terms, which was also reflected in one of my slides. And one way to do so is to, let's say, use a common top-level ontology, and there are a lot of scientific efforts and practices on that. One application successful so far application of this approach. So having a top level ontology in order to harmonize entities and relations up to bottom level. Let's say, is the OBO foundry. And then this practice also, we try to use this practice in other domains like the industrial domain. So I know that people, when start building ontologies, they start bottom up, but to some point they have to take into account also what are the, let's say, conclusions or guides by using higher level ontologies, such as middle level ontologies and top level ontologies and domain ontologies or subdomain ontologies, which should be free, which should be open source, which should be global, so that the interoperability is assured. So in practice, my feeling is that people in specific domains will start somehow bottom up, and but from some point, so alignment with higher level, upper level terms will be necessary. This is my answer to this question.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. So Hedi is back, so we'll pass the floor back to Hedi, and then if there are, I mean, we will address the other questions at the end in the Q&A session. Also, if there is any other aspect of this question that you would like to address again, we can do that after Hedi's session. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for this network problem. So, I mean, maybe to, if my problems with network back again, maybe, I mean, let's have Dimitris as co-chair for this panel. As I said, it's a big pleasure to have our panelists today. So I welcome Boon Sherm Kilvatunu from NIST from US, and Mauro Dorgani, who is a research scientist at Fondazione Bruno Kessler. So Mauro is working also in collaboration with ETSI on smart M2M ontologies. Also, we have in the panel Ulrich Parson, who is the steering committee chair at IIRDS. We have also collaborators with OntoCommons, so Stefan Lamparter, head of research group at Siemens and presenting one of our demonstrators in OntoCommons, and Evgeny Karmalov, senior expert at Bosch and one of the OntoCommons partners. So, dear panelists, I'm really excited to hear from you your point of view at the relationship between ontologies and standards. So let's start from our guests from US. Please go ahead if you can provide some insights on this topic.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Hedi, for giving me opportunity to join this panel. It's my pleasure to be here. So in terms of the relationship between ontology and standard, I see two kinds of intermediate relationships, the design time and the runtime of the standard. For the design time, the ontology can inform traditional standard for development and harmonization, as many of you guys mentioned earlier. So in other words, I think ontology can help improve the quality of traditional standard at design time. So basically more making the semantics of data elements in the traditional standard more precise. So just to be clear, when I say traditional standards, I mean like, today's standard that people use for information exchange, something like a STEP or Open Application Group standard for supply chain exchange, that kind of stuff. Another kind of relationship is going to be a runtime, relationship. So the if we have an ontology counterpart I think the ontology can complement the traditional standard. For example, we can use ontology to annotate the traditional standard and use this annotation knowledge at the runtime, so that data is also available in the graph representation that can be used for ontology, making it easier for engineers and scientists to use this kind of data easier. So in this case, companies have to come up with the proper infrastructure to handle the size of the volume of data. I believe that companies see some values here, but they still need a proof of concept and also a proof of values. So I think companies are going to be more interested in number two, basically the one-time relationship of ontology to the standard. In the long term, we might see kind of a cannibalistic relation in the sense of ontology replacing traditional standard. But I think that is at least 10 to 15 years out, especially in the traditional manufacturing domain. This is because many companies still have the need to move fast with their integrations and the digitalization. Costs of integration based on the traditional standards are still cheaper and also faster, even if they still have to deal with semantic fuzziness. And that is a kind of the human resources that they have. They only know how to do how to integrate data using a traditional standard. They still need to have a lot of workforce development needed to use graph and also ontology in the integration. Plus also traditional SDOs and also technology companies are also continuously inventing the new tools and technologies to make integration based on the traditional standard faster and cheaper. From our perspective as NIST, we are working with industry on both fronts. Basically, we help SDOs and industry make better standards, better traditional standards, and also use them better. We also, lead the industry in the, particularly in the industrial ontology foundry to develop ontologies. It's kind of becoming a wedge between the old and the new. So specific to ISO, there are many ontology efforts currently outside of ISO. This is typical because standards are usually first developed outside of ISO and then brought to ISO for approval. So traditional standards are still being enhanced. They are added. I still see a faster pace than ontology. I think many standard bodies are beginning to think about ontology. For example, I see ISO TC 184, TC 213. These are the standard body dealing with product data. And also ASME, model-based engineering, MT Connect, additive manufacturing, all these start looking at the ontology. So we'll see some slow movement, I think, towards ontology.
That's great. Thank you very much. So what about you, Mauro? So from your experience with ontologies and standards in machine-to-machine domain.
Yeah. Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, thank you for the invitation to this panel. I think that in the meaning of the term ontology, we have already the intrinsic conceptual meaning also what is a standardization and interoperability, because obviously the design of ontologies can support people in giving a standard view of some specific domains. Here I can, provide some experiences from different perspectives, in the sense that by starting from the work that we are doing in ETSI, where there were, from almost 10 years, because I guess that the first the first effort in designing SAREF, that is this ontology for supporting the interoperability and communications between IoT devices. They started to model it around 2014, 2015. I mean, started the idea, and we already covered more than 10 domains, 11 if I remember well, with the aim of providing a common specification about how IoT devices in different domains should communicate between themselves. And obviously this effort at European level in particular, but we have a lot of liaisons also with other entities outside Europe, because we have a chapter of people that work in the US that is collaborating with us, aims to speed up, to foster the capability of different kind of devices and systems to communicate each other, obviously, in order to keep an eye also to the market, in the sense that obviously having high interoperability will facilitate also SMEs, as been mentioned by SERM and also other companies, to enter in new markets and also to increase their business, for example. Instead, I mean, in the research center in which I work in the digital healthcare domain. I work with ontologies since many years, and obviously working with ontologies definitely help us in providing a shared view of specific domains for better representing knowledge, for better representing information, and the use of ontologies increased a lot in different research areas for how can I say, for improving the capabilities of AI system to manage information, to process information, to communicate, to explain results of machine learning processes, for example, to experts, for improve the communication between the machine learning system themselves and humans.
Okay, that's great. So
yes.
Yeah, so I mean, this is very interesting to hear that from you. But let me ask a question in this way to Ulrich. I mean, from her experience in IRDS, because let's say acceptability of ontologies and the wide use of ontologies in industry is related to standards or not, and how industrials are dealing with ontologies. So there is this relation between standards and ontologies push industrial to have more trust to use ontologies.
Yeah, definitely. That is definitely true. You know, that we are, most of the consortium members of IRDS are located in Germany, and the German machinery industry heavily relies on standards. So one of the most important moves that we made was actually turning IRDS, which is a standard for content delivery, for technical documentation, to turn it into an actual standard. So to boost the application of the ontology that is inside IRDS in the field. And we've seen that the machinery industry and also other industries heavily rely on that. They need to rely on standard compliant deliveries from their supplier. For instance, when they get a product, when you are a process, and you work in the process industry, so you put together a lot of components into a plant, and you need to aggregate the technical documentation in the digital twin, for example. So how do you do that? You have to rely on a common standard to actually aggregate the documentation, to enable an AI, a chatbot, or somebody to query this documentation and to help service technicians to solve problems. And the industry is asking for standards for this. And they don't want to develop an interface with every AI platform, chatbot platform, or content delivery that is on the market. They want to have one standard, and that is definitely the case. And the second thing that I wanted to add, also in answer to the other panelists, is that what we also see is that standards themselves become more semantic. So you can actually enhance the semantic content of a standard. So you can define what is the subject of standardization, what is the level of, is that a shall requirement, is that a must requirement, is that an optional requirement? So the and also the technical terms, are we talking about electricity or whatever? So ontologies can help a lot to make standards machine readable, and also to test whether a product complies with a standard. So that's why both ontologies and standardization go hand in hand.
That's great. So let's hear from industrials. So Stefan, what about the state of standards and ontologies within Siemens?
Hello. So thanks a lot for inviting me. So I actually would like to directly connect to what Ulrike said, because that's actually really kind of also our view. So these two things or the two options of using ontologies to improve how we handle standards is also the case I think in Siemens, or at least our vision. So the first thing is, of course, ontologies can help us to make standards itself more machine readable, and that's why automatically processable. We can automatically validate if a certain product somehow complies to a certain standard, which is, for example, for safety critical things quite important, right? So in this direction, we believe there could be much more done in future and should be much more done. So we would really expect that more and more standards come in a formalized and automatically processable way, which would also kind of make our life in industry easier at certain times, right? So this is the first thing, but actually the more important part and the more important benefit ontologies will bring us is really about this combination across standards. So connecting information across different standards. So the interoperability between standards. Again, also the digital twin is something where we're as Siemens are heavily working on as part of our products, which we sell to our customers, but on the other hand, also internally for improving our processes. And if we are looking into the PLM process, so from designing a product, producing it, operating it down to the service, right? And if you look how many different standards you're using along this line, right? And none of them somehow fits to the other. That's actually today the big challenge we have and what we are doing. And that's also our use case a bit, which we want to bring into the OntoCommons project. So how can we make these different standards, and they will be different also in the next 10 years, right? There's no way to change the standard from today to tomorrow. How can we make these standards somehow interoperable? So can we link certain objects across the different standards that we can at least transform them, right? Still using these standards, because we cannot avoid them. And we probably also do not want to do it.
Yeah, so there is two aspects, if I would understand. So there is ontologized standards and standardized ontologies. So there is two ways. Evgeny, if you can provide some insights from your experience in Bosch and your vision about ontologies and standards.
I would like to add a little bit complementary view on that. I absolutely agree with the previous speakers about ontologies for standards and standardized ontologies. Another angle where I think ontologies are extremely important is in the realm of data. Ontology as the mechanism, as a vehicle to standardize data as a critical enabler for data standardization. And this data standardization is a big thing. For Bosch, with 200 plus manufacturing plants, and the goal of Bosch to make AI-powered production, one would like to layer a lot of AI solutions across factories. And those AI solutions, they rely on data. That requires to do a lot of data integration inside factories and across factories. That does require a high degree of standardization on data. And ontologies, they can and they play some role, and they can play a critical role in enabling this data standardization. To give you another example, actually, about European initiatives to push this sharing and connecting of data, there is an interesting project initiative called Catena-X. This is Alliance for Secure and Standardized Data Exchange. It is an alliance of many companies driven by BMW. It's an automotive industry in Germany. And there, the idea is to establish first data-driven value chain in automotive industry, from components to recycling, the whole value chain integrated. And the big idea is that players in this value chain will share data. So this is, again, Alliance for Standardized Data Exchange, which is unprecedented. Typically, companies, producers, they are reluctant to share data because a lot of competitive advantage can be lost if you share data. So this huge data sharing initiative, which started actually quite recently in May 2021 with the kickoff of Catena-X, it's an example of move within Europe to further data exchange, to further open the borders for data inside value chains, for example, in automotive. So in that case, again, standardization of data is critical. How to standardize data? I think for ontologies is a great timing to play a critical role as this data standardization enabler. This does require a lot of effort from the community around ontologies to push them forward with European projects, with other initiatives. And I think that if ontologies and the community around ontologies can use this moment in the right way and to embark on this data standardization and to connect to those initiatives and impose somewhat, not impose, but bring in somewhat, inspire those initiatives with ontologies for data standardization, then I think that would be a great steps for ontologies into standards, into this type of standardization as a standard for ontology sharing. And actually in Bosch, there is already use of ontologies for data integration, for welding quality monitoring, for a number of applications ontologies already used to enable data integration. They are also such that they are developed also based on international standards. For example, ISO 62264 and IEC 62264 is used for to create ontology for data integration in manufacturing. Another ISO 18278 is used for data integration for welding quality monitoring. So this is another angle of standards. So this is when international standards become transformed or influence the ontology development, but this is a different story. So this is another impact, but what I would like to emphasize is that great timing for ontologies to become part of the standardization for data sharing.
Okay, so let me build on that. I mean, ontology development and also standardization process is time consuming and it's usually long. Which is not usually in line with business time and expectations. So in industry, we need to see impact as soon as possible. So I would like to get your insights about your position statement on what priorities we need to focus on in the short term to go fast toward the standardization and the use of ontologies. So, sir, what do you think about this?
Okay, thanks, Hedi. I'm going to answer this question more or less based on what I see in the IOF. The IOF community, which is focused on the traditional manufacturing domains, seem to be looking for like a silver bullet ontology. So one that is, very semantically expressive and precise, and architecturally very sound, such that, we can have a very good derivative hierarchy from the general to the specific application domain. So plus there's the clash between, the expectation from the domain expert and the ontologists about the terms used. So, as you mentioned, standard development traditionally is already known to be slow. So right now, this kind of expectation make the ontology development time even worse, right? Far worse. So to me, the most important priority is to lower the bar associated with the quality and expressiveness of the industrial ontologies. So we need to have a wide accepted ontology development process, one that is agreed to and understood by both the ontologists and the domain experts. That this process has to have a maturity model where everyone accepts that, hey, ontology expressivity can be and should be improved over time. The first version doesn't have to be perfect, and may consist of only certain axioms with the low logical profile. Second, this process has to also basically educate the domain experts that ontology has a provisions for them to deal with the ugly terms. Okay, later on. So the first step in the ontology development is really to provide the clear semantic differentiations between the terms. And then later on, they can come in and use whatever label they want, to their own understanding, as long as it provide the uniqueness. So yeah. So the other important priority is really specifically for the IF to release this core ontology. And again, it's about the expectation. We may need to lower the bar. It seemed to me that today industry are happy enough to have the data in the graph representation. Most of the ontology tools today have really limited reasoning capability. So having the data that are connected in the graph seem to be provide at least sufficient return on investment, at least maybe for big company like Bosch and Siemens. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you. So Mauro, what about priorities from your point of view?
From my personal perspective, I guess that one of the main priority could be to understand if actually ontologies could be the right way for representing standards. Now, in the sense that from the research perspective, we already demonstrated the feasibility and the suitability of ontologies. Early, Ulrike provided a good point in the sense that also standards that needs more semantic, need to be more ontologized. So in the short term, I guess that as a community in general, both from research, commission, and also industries, we need to agree to the fact that the use of ontology could be the best way for starting the description of standards, for starting the description of domains, in order to work all together towards this direction. And then to decide that this could be, the most effective enabler for doing a very big step towards the complete quoted of interoperability between system and devices all over the world. Okay, all right. So Ulrich, what about you? So priorities from your perspective.
Priorities. Sam has already mentioned a few. I think what you said about lower the bar, when we want people to develop ontologies, we need to provide them with a framework. So we would love to switch IRDS to the next level, for instance. We are still on RDF. We would like to switch to OWL. What we need is a nice top-level ontology that we can connect to, and just because we are a domain ontology, we would like to connect ourselves to a upper-level ontology. So we need that. And the second is that we need a registry of ontologies where we can actually search for existing ontologies for specific use cases. And third, we need use cases, as you do with your demonstrators, so that you can see, okay, these are industries already using ontologies, and so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And fourth maybe is that knowledge about ontologies is really still limited to a very specific group of experts. So we have to bring the knowledge into to a broad level, because a lot of computer scientists still don't know how to deal with ontologies. And frameworks and architecture papers and architecture concepts would help with that.
Very insightful, thank you. So let me ask Stefan and Evgeny about two things. First, the priorities from industrial perspectives, and also how do you see the standardization landscape evolving over the next 3 or 5 years? So again, from industrial perspective.
Okay, so maybe then shorter answer. So lower the bar, lower the bar, lower the bar. I would simply support this, because if at the end, this has to be a community effort, and it has to be an effort by the people that are doing the standardization. So building the industry standard, it's not an effort by a semantic community. So we have to make them able to build these ontologies. Otherwise, that will not work, right? And also the developer experience within companies. It has to be better, right? Because otherwise, we will not convince our developers to use that technology at all. So that is the first thing. And the other is the complete standardization with ontologies or without has to be more agile, as somebody already said, right? And has to speed up to some extent, right? Otherwise, we will simply have some quasi standards where an industry or academic consortium will define something, right? We are not in a time where we are waiting 2, 3, 4 years until somebody agrees on terminology. That time is, I think, too long in future.
Yeah,
that would be my.
Thank you. So Evgeny.
Absolutely agree with previous speakers, and I would like to complement with a different angle is also popularization of ontologies in the following way. Not so many people are aware about ontologies in industry, and one way of popularizing them, for example, there are essentially not that many books that you can buy and read about how to use ontologies in industry. This type of popularization is kind of also adding to the lowering the bar, to explaining people what are the ontologies, what are their benefits from the industrial perspective. And that, for example, OntoCommons as a consortium will provide a collection of documentation at the end. If there is a chance to somewhat go towards a book that will compile these good practices, standards, and give a good, and this book can give a good overview of the landscape, this can contribute actually a lot into making industry aware of ontologies in some way that is easy to understand. And of course, this has to be complemented with some tooling. For example, asset administration shells that exist. They are clear and understandable for people who work in industry. At the same time, tools like Protege are much less appealing and much less clear. And this goes into lower the bar. It's hard to say that this is the job of OntoCommons, obviously, to do that. It's a more general observation about the difficulties of assimilating ontologies. Another thing that I think which is important in the years to come is that from the perspective of data sharing, these ontologies as enabler for this data integration and sharing, one of the big walls on this way for data sharing is trust. And in trust, for example, how to make legal contracting across organizations that they would offer data and they would engage in this data sharing. Ontologies, if they focus only on the technical aspects of machines, modeling machines as digital twins and enabling data sharing, is a great thing. If they will also offer some support to other aspects which are important, not only technological, but also things related to, for example, how to do this legal sharing of information. If they also would allow to set some way of contracting across organizations, multi-peer contracting on the data sharing, that would also be a great thing, because currently asset administration shells, they never enter this area of trust and these things and legal aspects. And they, at least from what I observed in these forums on data sharing in industry, so that's a critical bit. People afraid of sharing data, although there are technological advancements that allow to do so. And so ontologies can support data sharing from the technological point of view, plus maybe also would be able to support from that. But this is maybe a little bit kind of futuristic vision of ontologies to support this from the legal side and other like ethical aspects of data sharing and integration. But again, so on the short also term that on book of OntoCommons on ontologies, I think would be also a great way of advancing ontologies into industry.
And let me also add something. I mean, also, I think that bridging the gaps between ontologists, domain experts, business people, it's very important to show this value chain from knowledge about ontologies and make them in use and really show the impact for business people to understand on this way. So let's also get some questions from the audience, and I think also it's a very important question that we have from Tom Berry, because yeah, formally most of ontologies that are existing today are coming from research projects. And so Tom is asking, formally, when a research project determines a need for standards, who is responsible to create new work item proposals for a standard organization? So please, our panelists, feel free to jump and provide some insights on this question from your experience, from previous experience.
Connection is breaking a little bit from your side. I didn't understand the question. Could you repeat it again?
Yeah, couldn't quite get the question.
Okay. Formally, when a research project determines a need for standards, who is responsible to create new work item proposals for standard organizations? So let's say how to do this link between research projects outcomes or identification of needs of standards or output ontologies from research projects, how to have the link with standards organizations and go the process of standardization of outcomes or to launch a new working group on the standard.
So I can answer from the IOF perspective. Basically, the IOF is an open community, right now, and there is like a sign up page on the IOF website. And once you join the IOF, you can definitely propose a working group. We have a template where you can fill out the charter, the objective, and the committee will review the proposal, and where you can, and then you can, if it's approved, then you can start a working group and work on the ontology. That's answer your question, Hedi.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's check if there is other questions. So there is some questions about top-level ontologies and domain ontologies. We had some answers about this, let's say, importance of top-level ontology, and I think also Dimitris deals with this question. There is another question about it's, let's say, cross-domain ontologies. So I think Stefan, you talked about this aspect about ontologies and interoperability and standard interoperability.
Yeah. So we try to use top-level ontologies in order to bridge the different domains. So I think also, as the example says, so for example, we have a clean room, right, where you have a process industry where you have to produce a certain thing, right, and then you also have to combine, if you engineer or plan this production, you also need the building information, for example, to that, right, and in addition you might need information from the electrical kind of connections and so on, right? And to bring in these worlds, there we try to use top-level ontologies, for example, for an asset, right? An asset is kind of a machine, but also a sensor in a building and so on. And what we try to do is to agree between the different Siemens units on something like that, because then the different services that can handle this kind of assets can also be reused and exchanged. And that's, but also this is clear, this is not easy task, and also the processes and maintenance of such kind of shared models is easily getting quite complicated. So in this area, I think also some methods and around managing this kind of ontologies and different layers and different domains and so on have to be established. And I hope OntoCommons can contribute on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I mean, this is very important insight about concluding this panel, because in OntoCommons we really expect to collaborate with all of you in order to reach this objective to standardize ontologies and to use ontologies for cross-domain interoperability and provide standards for data documentation. So I would like to thank you again, all our panelists, because we are a little bit late, but let's conclude the part, and I give the floor to Nadja to this webinar.
Thanks a lot, Hedi. Thanks a lot for this very interesting discussion, also to excellent presentation, interesting presentations to the speakers, but also to the panelists. I can say that from the discussion, it's absolutely clear that industry needs standards, and that there is also, with growing number of data and with Industry 4.0, there is even significantly more need in the future for standardization of ontologies. And also I see what was mentioned, another direction as well, to use ontologies for standards. I can maybe also contribute to this one question from audience. How can various stakeholders or European projects reach different standardization organizations? I invite all participants to join working groups in OntoCommons. With this, you can simply collaborate with the consortium, and we can for sure collaborate together also on the task that is devoted to collaboration with various standardization organizations. OntoCommons works on landscape analysis. OntoCommons works on gap analysis. And also, finally, we should come in the community to the joint conclusion and to agreement regarding the recommendation on standards as well, on different ontologies from the top level until the domain level. I would like also to use the opportunity at the end of this webinar to announce a large workshop that is going to be organized within OntoCommons project on various topics along the whole working program of OntoCommons project. This will be from the 2nd until the 5th November online, and it's a global workshop with a large number of participants on various topics. But there will be especially one session under the title Enabling Intra-Ontology Interoperability Through Shared Terminology. So this session practically will be a follow-up discussion on this webinar today, and I kindly invite you to register for the workshop and to contribute in various sessions, but in particular this one will be a follow-up on this topic. I liked very much the comment of Ulrike, of panelist, who said ontologies and standardization go hand in hand. And with these words, also I would like to conclude this workshop. Once again, thanks a lot for your participation, active contribution. Thanks a lot to the speakers and panelists as well. And I hope then to see you in November in the session, follow-up session of this one today. Thanks a lot and have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.